recording of the session is also requested. Yeah, thank you. Recording of the session is also requested. Thank you so much. So Dr. Jadhav, with your permission, then we will formally begin.
Yes, kindly.
Thank you so much. On behalf of WRC ICSSR, the current Honorary Director, Smita Shukla, invite all the participants to this program. ICSSR Western Regional Center, under its jurisdiction, has 3 states. One is Maharashtra, where our center is located at the campus of University of Mumbai, Kalina. In addition to that, other 2 states which are under the coverage of Western Regional Center is Gujarat and Goa. We also have under our coverage the Union Territory of Daman and Diu. Our center, Western Regional Center, keeps on conducting several such initiatives, one of which is being organized today. We keep on organizing lectures from esteemed academicians who can speak on various aspects of social sciences. And under the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav series, in fact, we are doing such lecture sessions which are focusing on our 75 years of independence and learnings we can have from our struggle during the period when we were struggling for independence and beyond that. So when I refer to session which is being conducted today, the theme is Bhagat Singh, a revolutionary with a vision. It is a topic which is very apt for the current times and the learnings which we can have from the life of Bhagat Singh. And Dr. Avkash Jadhav, who is Associate Professor and Head Department of History at St. Xavier's College, Mumbai, in fact has done extensive research on this area. He also has research papers in this area. And Western Regional Center felt that there can be no better speaker than him to speak on this topic. But before I invite him, I'll quickly like to brief the audience about other activities at the Western Regional Center. So Western Regional Center, as I spoke about, has multiple activities under its umbrella. One among them is the lecture series, which we are organizing today. In addition to that, Western Regional Center is also funding seminar, conferences, workshops in the area of social sciences. The center is also extending, with the support of the council, which is Indian Council for Social Science Research, also support for minor research projects. There are limits, financial limits on that how much can be extended. We provide book grant, we support journals from the region, etc. And this lecture series, which we are conducting, one session today, I'm sure that this will be benefiting those who are researchers, teachers, students in area of social sciences. And beyond that also, the participants will be able to, in fact, get a view on a revolutionary whom we have heard about a lot, discussed a lot, but how do we look at it from perspective of an academician and history professor who has done extensive research? That we will be looking at. I also take this occasion to welcome Dr. Prakash Maruti Masaram, who is Head Department of History, University of Mumbai, and sir will be presiding over the session. Sir also has very extensive research experience. In fact, let me speak a little bit about sir and then I'll formally introduce our speaker of the day. Let me briefly speak about Dr. Prakash Masaram. Dr. Prakash Masaram, as I stated, is currently Head Department of History. He is holding more than 13 years of rich teaching experience. He is a member of Board of Studies in History and Archaeology at University of Mumbai. His specialization area is modern Indian history, Gandhian studies, tribal history, culture, etc. And his topic was titled Mahatma Gandhi, Nai Talim Education System, our historical study 1904 to 1960. He has several research papers, publications under him. He also has been invited resource person at UGC, ICHR, ICSSR, etc. He is a research guide and he has guided several students. Sir, welcome you to the session and thank you for giving your consent to preside over this session. And let me, with permission of now, Dr. Avkash Jadhav, introduce, sir. Dr. Avkash Jadhav, as I've already introduced, is Associate Professor and Head Department of History at St. Xavier's College, Mumbai. He's a gold medalist, BA in History, PhD in the labor movement. He has multiple, in fact, several scholarly research works which are centering around labor studies, religion, philosophy, human rights, ancient and modern Indian history. He is recipient of 9 scholarships for his academic excellence, like D.D. Kaushambi Scholarship, Merit Scholarship, William Coelho and C.M. Kulkarni Scholarship. He also has been awarded prestigious Asiatic Society Fellowship to pursue studies on Gandhian philosophy. He has conducted more than 30 surveys on various issues and findings of surveys. Findings of these surveys are part of, in fact, government agency policy considerations. Agencies like MCGM, then MMRDA, BEST, Western Zone Railways, Ministry of Environment, Mangroves Department, Cyber Crime Department, Narcotics, KEM Hospital, Mumbai Heritage Conservation Committee, Solid Waste Management Department of BMC have in fact incorporated many of his suggestions. He is widely known for being innovative teacher and usage of encouraging and he in fact encourages usage of documentary making, oral documentation, conducting research-based assignments, surveys, field research, etc. While he is encouraging and guiding his students and conducting his research as well. He has participated in more than 200 international and national conferences, seminar, workshops. He has around 30 publications to his credit. He has authored books on history of Bombay, history of USA, history of modern Maharashtra, and has authored textbook on history, which is used by the Goa board for the 10th standard. Dr. Avkash Jadhav was nominated as municipal councillor in the BMC between the period 2012 and 17 as a representative from the academic section. He has so far commissioned more than 40 surveys on social sciences and findings are used by government bodies. He's instrumental in getting 103 square kilometers of Sanjay Gandhi National Park as no plastic zone after a struggle of 11 years. He has guided 35 documentaries and received more than 18 national and international awards for the social work, human rights activities, environmental and heritage activism, and has been felicitated by National Human Rights Center thrice for his work in human rights. Pragat Maharashtra Award, Manav Seva Puraskar, Babu Jagjeevan Ram Rashtriya Puraskar, Vivekanand Yuva Gaurav Puraskar, National Talent Merit Award, etc. His notable feats and achievements, let me speak briefly about that, as well as municipal councillor, were raising issues for protecting art, aesthetics, decor, heritage of the Queen Necklace, which is the coastal promenade of our city. In fact, we call that as Queen Necklace. Discovering 53 underground water tanks as old as 100 years, capacity of more than 250,000 liters of static water, and which are now being conserved, restored by fire brigade as under the city of Mumbai. He has introduced a cultural policy to be adopted for the city of Mumbai to promote intangible and tangible heritage. He has also been instrumental in introducing a policy on having first e-waste processing unit in India. His policy for the protection and preservation of heritage in Mumbai was approved by BMC and has been given sanction of 5 crores of rupees. And he also has worked as a councillor to establish mangrove park at Dahisar. He has adjudged top 10 municipal council. He was adjudged top 10 municipal councillors in under Mumbai region, among 232 councillors for his contribution which he has made. He has been recently awarded a major research project by ICHR to work on documentation of mill workers in Mumbai, subject expert on censor board, former trustee of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya, panelist on staff of selection commission, visiting faculty to train students for civil services, etc. In fact, his resume is so wide. In addition to that, he also balances his life because he's also an avid tracker, poet, numismatist, and we are in fact, sir, now eager to listen to you and what you have to state in terms of what are your observations and research on Bhagat Singh, a revolutionary with a vision. So with permission of Dr. Masram and Avkash Yadav, sir, let me invite sir to start the session. Thank you so much.
I share my screen.
Yes, sir. Is the permission there? IT team, I request you to check that the permission is available with Dr. Jadhav to share the screen.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Aniket, yes. Thank you so much.
At the outset, let me express my heartfelt gratitude. Am I audible clearly?
Yes, Dr. Jadhav, you are.
Let me express my heartfelt gratitude to ICSSR Western Region, Dr. Shukla, for giving this opportunity, and also congratulating her for organizing the series as part of Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav. Also, Dr. Masram, who is chairing the session, my fellow colleagues, people in the audience who have joined us through YouTube. This is a paper which I had written almost 14 years back when a conference was convened at University of Mumbai by the Department of Political Science. And to be very honest, I have really contemplated a lot during the course of my writing. The journey of exploring, going through the archival documents on Bhagat Singh was not only tedious, but equally it changed my very perspective towards a leader who generally is remembered because of his acts of violence. I would share a small anecdote. A few years back, I was interacting with the students from a school, and I asked them who their role model is when they study history of modern India, who they would regard as their role model, who they would like to follow. And there were answers which not only startled me, which also made me think that history writing is a task which has to be done responsibly. Because first you should know history and then you should distort it. That's how I always believe. So first to present the facts, and then you have your liberty to incorporate your imagination, your ideological influences. The answer which many students gave was that they really admire Bhagat Singh. And when I asked them that why do they admire Bhagat Singh, they said he had pistols, he had guns, he had bombs. And that's why they really idolized Bhagat Singh. That was the time I felt that indeed we need to highlight some of the aspects of what Bhagat Singh basically was, what he stood for. And that's the reason why my title itself says he was a revolutionary, but of course, a revolutionary with a vision which in fact was so significant that it influenced generations together. And even till date, we have this long standing debate on the acts of Bhagat Singh, his philosophy, his ideology, and the sacrifice which cannot be forgotten. It has definitely left an indelible mark on our history. As we know that history is nothing else but recording our progress, our evolution. And when we try to write an objective history, which is a distant dream, it may sometimes disturb the contemporary uh, followers of those icons, or it can perhaps offend people who are not ready to look at history from that objective point of view. And the general tendency which we have is that to look at history from non-empirical approach. And this lack of non-empirical approach, or rather not inculcating empirical approach, somewhere pushes us in classifying, or rather compartmentalizing the icons. We have taken the icons of our modern Indian history, or for that matter of history, and we have tried to give them a different kind of a shape. We have tried to classify them as per our convenience today. And of course, when we look at modern Indian history, the history textbooks are in fact congested with the references of only the leaders who were part of Indian National Congress. The one who did not keep alignment with the Indian National Congress or the dominant leaders of the time, they were forgotten from the chapters of or the books of history as such. Now, when we look at the beginning of the freedom struggle, for that matter, post 1857, which is again a debatable area, that was it a first war of independence? But let me tell you, many revolutionaries, for that matter, did derive their inspiration from that phase of India's history. The movement, which otherwise was debated upon as either it was a revolt, it was a uprising, or was it really a first war of independence? When we talk about the American history, the struggle of the 13 colonies is looked upon as American War of Independence. But anyway, my focus is on that line. But when we write about history of our freedom struggle, we need to balance our research. We need to try to give a perspective which would just highlight the facts, or which would highlight what is available in a document, rather than giving an approach, or rather than giving an opinion to our readers. And many times, in the bargain, a student of history is given a very myopic view of some of these events or icons or the leaders. To begin with Bhagat Singh's early life, he was named as Bhaganwala by his grandmother, because the day he was born, his father Kishan Singh was released on the same day from Lahore Central Jail. His father and his uncle, they both were very prominent freedom fighters of the time, Sardar Ajit Singh. So he had witnessed this kind of atmosphere in his house, where the national politics was discussed, where the various movements across the nation were discussed prominently, profoundly. He could not, in a way, if you go to see, escape from this entire grooming orientation, which was to shape him as a leader who would be followed in the due course by the youth. These are few actual photographs of Bhagat Singh right from his childhood to his involvement in theatre when he was in National College, Lahore. On the right hand side, you can see his photograph at Lahore railway police station during his first arrest. And finally, the photograph on the extreme right on your screen, which was clicked before the assembly bomb explosion. So as he was getting this kind of atmosphere to become perhaps not a revolutionary, but the one who was quite well aware of the national politics, he had not set aside his entire schooling and his career or his professional outlook. He was parallelly also meticulously following the guidelines from his parents to complete his education. At the young age of 16, his parents started looking for him, looking for the bride for him. By this time, imagine at the age of 16 today, if at all we look at the youth around and we look at Bhagat Singh at the age of 16, he was quite clear, categorically clear, that what he would be engaging is, what he would be dedicating his life to. He realized that he would not be able to convince his parents, nor he wanted to show his ungratefulness towards them, their contribution. He left his house in Lahore and proceeded to Kanpur, which was a hotbed or the epicenter of the revolutionary activities. But before leaving, he left a small note for his parents where he stated that, and I quote, "My life has been dedicated to the noblest cause, that of the freedom of the country." The reason why he wanted to make it clear to his parents, because he did not want it to leave a widow in the family like his other two uncles. And so his entry into Hindustan Republican Association was what perhaps was waiting for in 1924. Very often in his house, there would be discussion on the speeches of Lal Lajpat Rai, Sardar Kartar Singh Karaba, Amba Prasad, Lala Pinditas. These were local heroes, local icons, who were quite actively involved in taking up various movements in the region. Apart from this kind of influence, Bhagat Singh was also an avid reader, and we also see the influence which he had after reading the books of Leo Tolstoy, Victor Hugo, and indeed influence from Marx, Engels, Rousseau, Aristotle, Hobbes. Sardar Bhagat Singh came quite close to Kartar Singh Saraba. Now, Kartar Singh Saraba, who was born in 1896, he was quite actively involved in the overseas movement. Along with Raj Bihari Bose, he did plan to infiltrate the army, but unfortunately he was arrested. Arrest of Kartar Singh Saraba, in fact, did move Bhagat Singh and some of his friends, because they were quite closely associated and they were monitoring the activities of Sardar. It is also noted that they would very often visit his house. He would guide Bhagat Singh and his comrades. On various occasions, he had also funded some of the activities as such. Saraba was executed at the young age of 19. Bhagat Singh was 12 years old. This was a very traumatic experience for Bhagat Singh. By this time, he had anyway prepared himself that he would get involved in the freedom struggle. And he felt that the atrocities committed by the Britishers on such young people was not justified. It was on the insistence of Saraba, Bhagat Singh had also got himself involved in Gandhiji's non-cooperation movement. As we know, the suspension of non-cooperation after Chauri Chaura did leave nation directionless. People who had abandoned their services, they had come out openly against the government, suddenly felt that the suspension was nothing else but an act of betrayal on part of Indian National Congress and Gandhiji. The national leadership was under a question mark. Bhagat Singh, who was at this point of a time religiously following the diktats, the instructions, the guidelines of International Congress, started drifting from the mainstream politics. 1920 to 25 is also a phase when we have some of the stalwarts who had led the Indian National Congress from the front, especially leaders like Lokmanya Tilak, who passed away in 1920, had left Congress in the hands of Gandhi, who had returned from South Africa. And Gandhi's philosophy, his ideology, was still not quite well understood. It had not penetrated much into the remote parts of India. It was through his writings in the newspapers Gandhi was understood by many. But practicing Gandhi's philosophy, his ideology, was not an easy task. It was equally arduous as well as much demanding. The withdrawal of non cooperation made Bhagat Singh feel that he cannot follow the leadership of Indian National Congress. And so he made up his mind to join HRA. He was a very good orator because he had read enough, or rather adequately enough, to understand what was going in the country and as well as the international politics. Had an impressive personality, and his intellectual ability, in fact, would leave many of his contemporaries in awe. His way of explaining certain things, or his way of putting across the complicated aspects and the concepts into simplicity, would make him instantly popular among the youth. He was thoroughly aware, he was clearly aware what he was into and what he would plan for that matter. I would like to read the objectives of HSRA, and it will be very clear that how it was not just a revolutionary group, which many people felt at that point of time, that which in fact they received opposition from all the stakeholders of society at that point of a time. That HSRA, the youth are misdirected, they do not know what they're doing. I read out this excerpt. In a short time, he galvanized the moribund organization. At this time, the party was scattered into groups in different cities with no definite program or scheme of work before them. Such groups were in existence at Lahore, Delhi, Kanpur, Banaras, and Allahabad, and also a few places in Bihar. Sometimes in July 1928, a meeting was held at Kanpur, and it was decided were to be called together to form a central committee. According to this decision, Bhagat Singh and Vijay Kumar Sinha began to tour about the country. And in September 1928, an important meeting was held at Purana Killa, New Delhi. 2 or 3 representatives each from Bihar, UP, Punjab, and Rajputana region were called together. And this meeting continued for 2 days. Bhagat Singh also urged for changing the name of the party at this meeting from Hindustan Republican Association to Hindustan Socialist Republican Association. Bhagat Singh had made his ideas very clear that they are looking at winning the freedom and independence at any cost. They were not ready to sacrifice the nation's pride and honor in front of the British Raj. Shortly, the headquarters were shifted from Jhansi to Agra. The revolutionaries indeed went through a tough time, and here is the excerpt. 2 houses were taken on rent, and the young men who left their families, their home, came and lived there together. They lived in utter poverty, for the party was always in need of funds. At one time, for 3 continuous days and nights, There was absolutely nothing to eat except a cup of tea. In the terrible winter nights of India, they had only 2 or 3 blankets to share between them, and no bedding. With ever increasing zest for study, Bhagat Singh began to build up a small library at Agra. With this purpose, he roamed about, begging for books from sympathizers. In a short time, a distinctive, though small library grew up there, and the most important section among the books were, of course, of economics. Now, though the group, in fact, had a different type of method, they were called unconstitutional in their approach. They were outrightly condemned by the various contemporary political parties. They were always on the radar from the local newspapers. They continue to remain firm with a very strong determination on their agenda. That they equally want to make a difference and they equally want to participate more assertively in this freedom struggle. While opposing the Simon Commission in India on 17th November 1928, Lalaji succumbed to his injuries. And this was quite alarming because the British Raj had reached to its pinnacle of atrocities. Their arbitrary behavior, their arrogance, in fact, was very easily evident and visible at that point of a time. Bhagat Singh responded to an appeal, and I quote, at a public meeting, Srimati Basanti Devi, wife of Chitranjan Das, gave a provocative speech to the countrymen. I quote, my blood boils with rage to think that Lalaji, who had been so aged and dear to his countrymen, has been beaten to death by that brute English police officer. It is a challenge to the youth and the manliness of 300 million Indians. On behalf of the women of India, I want to reply to my question about whether Indian youths are dead or alive. Is there anyone from the young generation to step forward and respond to my question? This question definitely was responded by Bhagat Singh and his comrades. They assassinated Saunders at Lahore on 17 December 1928. I'll read out the poster which was circulated after the murder of Saunders. It was a notice signed by Balraj, that is Azad, Chandrasekhar Azad. This was a notice which was drafted by Bhagat Singh and his comrades, by Hindustan Socialist Republic Army. Bureaucracy beware. With the death of J.P. Saunders, the assassination of Lal Lajpat Rai has been avenged. It is a matter of great regret that a respected leader of 30 crores of people was attacked by an ordinary police officer like J.P. Saunders and met with his death at his mean hands. This national insult was a challenge to young men. Today, the world has seen that the people of India are not lifeless. Their blood has not become cold. They can lay down their lives for the country's honor. The proof of this has been given by the youth who are ridiculed and insulted by the leaders of their own country. Tyrant government, beware. Do not hurt the feelings of the oppressed, suffering people of this country. Stop your devilish ways. Despite all your laws preventing us from keeping arms, and despite all your watchfulness, people of this country would continue to get pistols and revolvers. Even if these arms are not adequate in numbers for an armed revolution, they would be sufficient for avenging the insult to the country's honor. Even if our own people condemn us and ridicule us, and if foreign government subjects us to any amount of repression, we shall all be ever ready to teach a lesson to foreign tyrants who insult our national honor. Despite all opposition and repression, we shall carry forward and call for revolution. And even if we go to the scaffold for being hanged, we shall continue to shout, long live revolution. Now, I would like you to pay attention to this, the last two paragraphs of this notice. They are equally important, where they write, "We are sorry to have killed a man, but this man was a part of cruel, despicable, and unjust system, and killing him was a necessity. This man has been killed as an employee of the British government. This government is the most oppressive government in the world." The last para, where again they mention, "We are sorry for shedding human blood, but it becomes necessary to the bathe the altar of revolution with blood. Our aim is to bring about a revolution which would end all exploitation of man by man. Long live revolution," dated 18th December 1928. Now, issuing a public notice like this after the assassination and making their stand clear, their intentions clear, why did they do it? And also signaling the government that they should be aware that this kind of act on their part, brutality on their part, of course, would be responded to. And equally emphasizing that they are sorry, that they don't want to get into this kind of a heinous act, but the government is compelling them. Since there was no response from the other side, the natives, the government thinks that it's a country of cold-blooded people. And this notice, in fact, was one of the testimony used by the government when they arrested Bhagat Singh. In the pamphlet, they in fact tried to also highlight that they equally value human life, but they also condemned the way the British government was carrying out their activities. I recall this wonderful book here, which was written by Dadabhai Nauroji on poverty and un-British rule in India, where he wanted to highlight that how the British do not act like British rulers the way they do it in other parts of the world. How they rule or they administer in their own country in a different kind of a democratic process, and how they deprive the nation through the exploitation. The very purpose of throwing the bombs in Assembly Hall on 18th April 1928 was to awaken both the passive Indians and the indifferent British. The motive was that the bombs are needed to let the deaf hear. While arguing their case in the court on 4th June 1929, they made it clear, "We affirm our faith," I quote, "that we shall never lag behind in our faith, that we shall never entertain the least hatred for any individual. On the other hand, we have indescribable regard for the human life." I would like to read the statement, the copy of written statement filed by Bhagat Singh and Batukeshwar Dutt in the court of the Sessions Judge, Delhi, in the assembly bomb case of 1929. "We stand charged with serious offences, and at this stage we explain our conduct. The following questions arise." Now, this is a copy of the statement, or the statements which Bhagat Singh and his comrades argued in the court of law. The following questions arise. Were bombs thrown into the chamber? If so, why? Second question, is the charge as framed by the lower court correct or otherwise? Now, to this, Bhagat Singh responds. To the first half of the question, a reply is in affirmative, that yes, they were thrown in the chamber. But some of the so-called eyewitnesses have identified themselves, and since we are not denying our liability to the extent, and as such, it is our statement about them. Be judged for what it is worth. By way of illustration, we may point out that the evidence of Sergeant Terry regarding the seizure of pistol from one of us is a deliberate falsehood, for neither of us had a pistol at the time we gave ourselves up. In our reply to the next half of the first question, we are constrained to go into some details to offer full and frank explanations of our motive and circumstances leading up to what has now become a historic event. When we were told by some of the police officers who visited us in the jail that Lord Irwin, in his address to the joint session of the two houses, after the question in the House, described it as an attack directed against no individual but against the Constitution itself, we readily recognized that the true significance of the incident had been correctly appreciated. We are next to none in our love for humanity, and so far from having any malice against any individual, we hold human life sacred beyond words. They also go on stating, our practical protest was against the institution, which since its birth has eminently displayed not only its worthlessness, but its far reaching power for mischief. The more we have pondered, the more deeply we have been convinced that it exists only to demonstrate to the world the Indian humiliation and helplessness. And it symbolizes the overriding domination of an irresponsible and autocratic rule. In fact, while arguing their case in the court of law, Bhagat Singh very aptly utilized that forum to justify the ideology, the thoughts of HSRA himself and the comrades. While discussing or while promoting utopian non-violence, he mentions, we have used the expression utopian non-violence in the foregoing paragraph, which requires some explanation. Force, when aggressively applied, is violence and is therefore morally unjustifiable. But when it is used in the furtherance of a legitimate cause, it has its moral justification. Elimination of force at all costs is utopian, and the new movement which has arisen in the country and of which we have given a warning is inspired by the deeds which were guided by Guru Gobind Singh, Shivaji, Kemal Pasha, Riza Khan, George Washington, Garibaldi, Lafayette, and Lenin, as both the alien government and the Indian public leaders appeared to have shut their eyes and closed their ears against the existence and voice of the motive. We have felt our duty to sound the warning where it could not go unheard. When they were asked in the court of law about their intentions of bombing, where they mentioned, we have so far dealt with the motive behind the incident in question, and now we must define the extent of our intentions. I quote, it cannot be gainsaid that we bore no personal grudge or malice against any of those who received slight injuries or against any other person in the assembly. On the contrary, we report that we hold human lives sacred beyond words and would sooner lay down our own lives in the service of humanity than injure anyone else. Now, what I try to highlight, what I want to basically highlight here is that here are the revolutionaries who were quite clear about their acts, who were aware of what they were projecting or what they were involved in. They really wanted a forum where the government's atrocities, their acts of suppression and repression can be brought out in exposition. In one of his statement during the trial, he stated, our idea of revolution has never been simply the bloodshed of some individuals. In fact, it also expresses very strongly that he valued, or the revolutionaries also valued, the human life, but they were not ready to forgive the ones who committed atrocities just to have them showcase or display their affection to the human lives. Because if they have the entire act, or they rather believe in the act of human dignity and human life, even the British government should equally treat them with the same honor. Another episode of Bhagat Singh is very prominently known is their hunger strike in the jail. which did attract attention of the leaders. The conditions in the jail, of course, was not only perilous but inhuman. Very often, the political prisoners were subjected to third degree torture. They were not given adequate food, they were not given the required facilities, and they were subjected to various horrors through day and night. Jawaharlal Nehru, when he got to know about the hunger strike of Bhagat Singh and Jatin Das and the other comrades, he had issued a statement which was carried in the newspaper, the Tribune, and I quote, I have learnt with deep grief of the hunger strike of Bhagat Singh Dutt and his comrades. For 20 days or more, they have refrained from all food, and I am told that forcible feeding is being restored to. They are fasting, not for any selfish ends, but to improve a lot of all political prisoners. Now, this was perhaps the first time that the political prisoners, under the leadership of Bhagat Singh and Jatin Das, managed to pick up the cause of the prisoners as such. Bhagat Singh, Rajguru, and Sukhdev, they were subjected to a very unfair trial. The trial when, on occasions, they were not even present. The verdict was given in their absence. The Governor General, by his ordinance, in fact, tried all the 24 accused in this entire uh, course of Saunders murder case, where sections 121, 121A, 122, and 193 of the Indian Penal Code was applied on them. And the pretext, or rather the uh, allegations was it was a war against the king, act of sedition. Bhagat Singh, Rajguru, and Sukhdev were also tried under the section of 302. We also witnessed that during the trial, the appropriate legal course was missing. The nationwide opposition to the verdict was also ignored for that matter. When it was revealed finally that there is no escape for the heroes, there was a nationwide protest. We have a similar protest which was organized in Bombay, where the school students, in fact, observed 23rd March 1931 as Bhagat Singh Day. A huge procession of students was planned from Angrewadi Girgaon at 11 a.m. Another rally was announced from Azad Maidan at 5 p.m. to Chowpatty. In fact, these rallies very often had slogans which highlighted the popularity of Bhagat Singh and the comrades. Slogans like Save Bhagat Singh from the hangman's noose. Another slogan was Who lives if Bhagat Singh dies? Another prominent slogan was No peace till Bhagat Singh is saved. The demonstration, which began from Azad Maidan at 5 p.m., covered the areas of Kalba Devi, Bhuleshwar, Girgaon, Back Road, Sanders Road, reached Chowpatty. It was attended by leaders like Sardar Jamayat Singh, Sergeant Abidali, Sergeant Melshuri. They also threatened the government that if Bhagat Singh and the comrades are hanged, it would lead to restarting the civil disobedience movement. Sergeant K.F. Nariman, who presided over the meeting, declared that if Bhagat Singh was hanged, the country will never forget the wrong. It was amidst this entire ideological crisis. Gandhi, who also came on the radar, or even his stand became quite important. Gandhi wrote letter for reconsideration to Lord Ivan, and I quote, "It seems cruel to inflict this letter on you, but the interest of peace demands a final appeal. If there is any room for reconsideration, I would urge you to suspend for further review an act that is beyond recall. It is generally argued or put forward that Gandhi was in the capacity to save or was in the capacity to convince or force the government to withdraw this verdict. But Gandhi remained silent and he did not do anything. Here is a testimony that Gandhi, at his level, though he had his own ideological differences or the methods were quite different, but he also tried to send an appeal to Lord Irwin. Gandhi even offered to be present for the meeting to resolve and rediscuss the sentence because even Gandhi understood that Bhagat Singh has become a national hero. What was inevitable and of course in the due course to become a historic page. A revolutionary who had made himself quite clear. And I quote Bhagat Singh, I am a revolutionary with definite ideas and ideology. He made it clear on the usage of arms and weapons. And I quote again, it is my considered opinion that bombs cannot serve our purpose. Throwing bombs is not only useless, but it is harmful as well. They are to be used on certain occasions only. Bhagat Singh was finally hanged in a very discreet manner at 7 o'clock in the Central Jail, Lahore, on 23rd March 1931, where even his relatives were allowed to meet him. And the way I mentioned, it was a very discreet kind of act, or rather more cowardly act on part of the British Raj. The next day, the Bombay Chronicle newspaper had the headline, Bhagat Singh and the comrades hanged at last. At the time of hanging, the British commissioner was to witness these executions. And when he went to meet Bhagat Singh looked at him and he stated, I quote, well, Mr. Magistrate, you are fortunate to be able to see how Indian revolutionaries can embrace death with pleasure for the sake of their supreme ideal. After the act, Jawaharlal Nehru, who equally offered his condolences as well as he equally expressed his helplessness, mentioned that the corpse of Bhagat Singh shall stand between us and England. In another such occasion where Jawaharlal Nehru also stated, not all of us could save him, who was so dear to us, and whose magnificent courage and sacrifice have been an inspiration to the youth of India. India today cannot even save her dearly loved children from the gallows. In Young India on 29th March 1931, Gandhiji, while addressing this issue, had stated, Bhagat Singh was not a devotee of non-violence, but he did not subscribe to the religion of violence. He took to violence due to helplessness and to defend his homeland. These heroes have conquered the fear of death. Let us bow to them 1,000 times for their heroism, but we should not imitate their act. Gandhi did express that the government has missed a golden opportunity to win over the rebels which side. Similarly, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, who had presided over the Karachi session of Indian National Congress, stated he condemned the government's obstinacy in carrying out the death sentence on Bhagat Singh, Rajguru, and Sukhdev, the revolutionary patriots for their violent activities in Punjab, despite a universal appeal for clemency. Generally, the debate between Bhagat Singh and Gandhiji is a more, I would say, debate of half information and half knowledge. We try to look at these two icons as extremes, we somehow cannot figure out that they can perhaps have some similarities also. Though they did not approve of each other's ways, the methods, but at least the differences cannot be highlighted to the extreme that we promote them as the enemies of the time. There were many more similarities between them. They both had mass appeal to their struggle. They both opposed, in their own ways, the British domination in India. And of course, the racial and religious superiority of the British government. Bhagat Singh's concept of opposing the British Raj was quite different than Gandhi. His method was to unify, infuse aggressive nationalism amongst the youth. He wanted the youth to come in action, rather get into the constitutional norms of signing petitions and memorandums. Bhagat Singh, a very well-read revolutionary, he was quite aware of what freedom is all about. And he felt that in order to attain freedom, we need to sacrifice. On one such occasion, he was asked, "What is revolution?" To which Bhagat Singh replied, and I quote, "By revolution, we mean that the present order of things, which is based on manifest injustice, must change. Producers or laborers, in spite of being the most necessary element of society, are robbed by their exploiters of the fruits of their labor and deprived of their elementary right. On the one hand, the peasants who grow corn for all starve with their own families. The weaver who supplies the world markets with textile fabrics cannot find enough to cover his own and his children's bodies. Masons, smiths, and carpenters who rear magnificent palaces live and perish in slums. On the other hand, capitalists, exploiters, parasites of society squander millions on their whims. These terrible inequalities and forced disparity of chances are heading towards chaos. The state of affairs cannot last, and it is obvious that the present order of society is merrymaking on the brink of a volcano, and the innocent children of exploiters, no less than millions of the exploited, are walking on the edge of dangerous path. The whole edifice of the civilization, if not saved in time, shall crumble. Radical change is therefore necessary, and it is the duty of those who realize this to reorganize society on a socialistic basis. Unless this is done, and the exploitation of man by man and of nation by nation, which goes on promoting imperialism, is brought to an end, the suffering and carnage with which humanity is threatened today cannot be prevented. And all talk of ending wars and ushering in an era of universal peace is undisguised hypocrisy. By revolution, we mean the ultimate establishment of an order of society which may not be threatened by such breakdown, and in which the sovereignty of the proletariat should be recognized, and as a result of which the World Federation should redeem humanity from the bondage of capitalism and the misery and of perils of war. As a socialist, Bhagat Singh had a true international outlook. That there was nothing of provincialism in him. In fact, he believed that this kind of socialist outcome or outlook is common to all revolutionaries. He had gone beyond that. He had left nationalism behind. He was far above the geography and regional approaches. For Indian revolutionaries, the appeal of nationalism and of patriotism have a supreme charm, and it was no smaller matter that we have come to take our stand, which is more on the international order than mere nationalism. His ideology was rather based from leading from the front, setting examples for the youth. He believed that socialist society is what is required. It should be governed by constitution, which rather promotes promotes a socialist and welfare state. He possessed the moral integrity of highest order. His leadership was not only convincing but equally powerful to mobilize people at a short time. He always believed that it was martyrs' blood that ripened ideas. He never advocated individual terrorism because he believed that force needs to be used with a definite purpose rather than merely showcasing strength or committing atrocities on innocent people. For him, the best way to oppose the British was with conscious faith in freedom. He knew the entire uh, impact of collective action, mobilization, involving people, engaging them. Bhagat Singh was truly a symbol of fearlessness and selfless sacrifice. These sacrifices, though, were not unheard of before, but of course, they left indelible mark in the history of India. These revolutionaries were not always welcomed. They never received uh, what I should say, um, acceptance with open arms. They had to defend themselves. They had to change their hideouts very often because of defections. They were very often, they would very often find it quite difficult to engage the youth rather, or to also have their meetings as they would frequently have the threat of police raids as such. But despite all this, they managed to hold their ground firm and stably. They were successful in attracting educated and committed youth to this forum. Uh, Bhagat Singh's entire approach, in fact, should be viewed not for his acts of violence or for his throwing of bombs in the assembly, but also for the ideology he stood for, the philosophy he wanted the youth to follow. As I mentioned, he had kept himself updated with international politics as well, what was going around. He was impressed with the way Russian Revolution was carried out. In fact, he and his associates had sent greetings to the Soviet Union in 1930 on the occasion of the anniversary of the November Revolution. He was quite well aware of the various political systems which existed around the globe, and he wanted zero tolerance to the exploitation of any kind in the country. He wanted the natives to believe that sacrifice is important. Today, when we look at the fundamental duties, we find fundamental duties in Article 51A, but whereas our rights, the freedom, fundamental rights, they begin from Article 14. Here we have a leader who believed in performing his duty rather than asking for his rights first. He fought for the rights of the political prisoners. He fought for the rights of the people who were voiceless, the marginalized. In fact, Bhagat Singh had also taken up the cause of the laborers, the mill workers. He vehemently opposed the trade dispute bill, which was about to get passed in the assembly. And the trade dispute bill, in fact, was nothing else but depriving and denying the workers of right to strike, depriving them of the right to collective bargaining. The political ideology of Bhagat Singh was based on the fundamental principles of bravery, fearlessness, and firm determination. The strike in the jail, in fact, did get him success, where the human conditions, the standard meals were introduced, though Jatin Das had to sacrifice his life in the entire due course. The change, bring out the difference, which all collectively were struggling for. Bhagat Singh believed that revolution may be anti-government, but it is certainly not anti-man. It is a vital living force which is indicative of the eternal conflict between the old and the new, by which he also meant that the change has to come and the change will come. And they are the ones who would become the catalyst for this change. As I mentioned, they were very often condemned. We have a reference from a local newspaper called Prabodh, which used to get published from Dhule. And I quote, after Bhagat Singh's death, the article mentioned about them in this manner. Bhagat Singh grew in popularity and its gaining importance because he openly refused to seek mercy from the British government. If he would have asked for it, then probably we may not have glorified him or called him great. Just because he chose to die happily, that makes him great. In spite of this approach, in spite of this, his approach and method should not be imitated upon. The Congress, which initially ignored the revolutionaries, but later on acknowledged the bravery and sacrifice. It was indeed an unavoidable situation for the Congress party, and they had to debate on how the execution of Bhagat Singh happened under the aegis of the British government. In his speech at Karachi in 1931, Jawaharlal Nehru remarked, Bhagat Singh was a clean fighter who faced his enemy in the open field. He was a young boy, full of burning zeal for the country. He was like a spark, which became a flame in a short time and spread from one end of the country to the other end, dispelling and prevailing darkness everywhere. Nehru did disapprove of the path taken up by Bhagat Singh and his comrades, but he did acknowledge the freedom and independence. I conclude my presentation, which we have inherited, in fact, today, demands us to act responsibly, accountably. The only tribute which we can pay to them basically is remembering their sacrifice, their selfless sacrifice. We also need to engage in the art of historiography more responsibly because the generation next need to know the complete story, the true history. They cannot be given the partial fact. They cannot be given a half truth because we owe a lot to the generation next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Avkash Yadav. So before I invite Dr. Masaram for his presidential remarks and comments, observations, we can have a quick session of question and answers. Let me put across one question before I invite others. So, sir, as you know, that my area is management. And when I listen to the thoughts which come from deep research in the history, there are always no questions which come to my mind that if you are looking at the entire struggle for independence for India from a perspective that this was a coordinated activity. There were different contributors who had different philosophies, but for them the goal was same. So if you look from that perspective, and you spoke about this context also towards almost last 2 or 3 slides, that when you look at the sacrifice which was made by Bhagat Singh, and when you look at the stand which was taken by some other parties, say for example when you refer to Congress, or when you talk about other ideologies which were existing, do you think that due credit was given to him at that time, or is it that due credit is available to him even till date? How do you look at it? Because he contributed, when I look at it from management perspective, his way was different, but he contributed. But how do you look at it, that political side, and what's your take on that, sir?
It's a very tricky question, and I don't want to be diplomatic here. Of course, as you know, that it is not that he was not given the due. Of course, he was given the due. If you refer to the newspapers, the leading newspapers, in fact, did bring out the debates which Bhagat Singh and his comrades did present in the court of law. He, in fact, used his arrest as nothing but as a pretext to go out in the arena of the British arena and to defeat them. Like, I mean, जिसको हम कहते हैं वैचारिक युद्ध भी था, ये सिर्फ एक हिंसक युद्ध नहीं था भगत सिंह का. मेरा कहना ये कि एक वैचारिक युद्ध भी था, एक इंटेलेक्चुअल डिबेट भी थी. You cannot just win over the British Raj by pistols and bombs, but you have to also go into their arena and engage in that one-to-one combating. So these debates, in fact, would get carried out very often. I'll also give you one small example. When this hunger strike was happening in the court, in fact, you would be shocked to know this strike went on for almost 52 days. Jatinda lost his life. And look at the entire act of the British. They did not allow the news of the strike, the hunger strike, to come out. It was much later that few Indian constables who, in fact, started getting this news outside. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, in fact, led a very strong delegation, and he wanted the government to do something about bringing down this hunger strike. So Bhagat Singh and his contemporaries, I would say non-Congress contemporaries, in fact, did support him. But what would happen that very often they would not get the forum where they could address their ideas. They would make people understand their objectives. It is nothing else but painting history with black and white. I mean, if you're not part and parcel of a particular ideology, then you are, of course, against us, for that matter, which cannot really happen. You need to have gray areas as such, and history has to be objective in its writing. So when you are saying due credit, I would still say he has not got the due credit. He just talk about Bhagat Singh at a very superficial level. Even at the school level, we don't talk about what Bhagat Singh stood for. Why I'm an atheist. This is a book which should be read by people, in fact, to know what, in fact, he means by that. He was not against religion as per se, but he was against certain aspects which should be, condemned, which are not part of the practices. So he was quite very well learned. In fact, he was quite clear with what he would speak, what he would in fact propagate, what he would advocate as such. Most important, whatever he preached, he walked the talk. And this is something which needs to be also understood, that the absence of a very strong youth icon at that point of a time, the void at that point of a time, was filled by Bhagat Singh. He was gaining popularity in a very rapid way. And it was also alarming the Congress. It was not that they were not alarmed. They were equally alarmed. But they were helpless because every day you could not see, you can ignore him for that matter, but you cannot eliminate him. He is there. You ignoring him does not necessarily eliminate him from the scene, political scene. So it is really time for us to revisit. I am not debating on what Gandhi should have done or what Nehru should have done. I have in my presentation also tried to balance it out. They had to acknowledge, they had to interfere, because ultimately they also had some political obligation as well as moral obligation as well. Congress party never advocated, they never took up the cause of the workers. But here you have a young leader who understands what is trade dispute bill. Workers were on strike and they were about to, get this kind of enforced law on them, that they cannot go on strike. If they go on strike, it will be illegal. This young boy who understands economics well, who has read enough about the process of exploitation, and he takes up the cause. So I think it is time to revisit Bhagat Singh, not because he bombed the assembly, but what he stood for. The courage, the selfless sacrifice. Nation first.
Thank you, Dr. Jadhav. One more question, which in fact is coming to my mind, is there are two aspects. One was, I said, was he given due credit to what he did? There is another thing which you started your session with, and you said that you have this experience that when you discuss about Bhagat Singh among the young students, Generally, students possibly who have not read much about him say that yes, he was a revolutionary and we admire him because he professed this philosophy which was about raising arms and fighting by using arms. But there is this context which you highlighted throughout your session, and you said that he was a revolutionary but with a difference. He was fighting on ideology. For him, life was very, very important, and life of others was very, very important. And he did not take any life. In fact, he just his protest was symbolic, but it was made at heart of what is the political nerve center of the government. So how will you like to advise the young students to look at Bhagat Singh? You have already highlighted, but if 3 to 4 no things which you would like to tell them to think over, that what really Bhagat Singh should mean to them and how they should be looking at him. This is one. Another thing is there have been several revolutionaries in history. If you have to do a comparison between say for example Bhagat Singh, and we know that Bhagat Singh was not alone when this bombing happened. So leave aside his those who were there present with him during this process of his when he registered his protest. But besides them, when you look at other revolutionaries, some did take life also. And sometimes this is also used as a justifiable ground to say by those who then raise arms to say it's all right. So it's a long question. I think I'm asking too much, but because there are young audience, so it will be nice in case you can give your view on this.
You asked me 3 to 4 questions. One, did he get the credit?
Yes.
Due credit? I would say no, not yet. Still, in fact, now when we are giving him credit, we are again trying to classify him with a particular school of thought, which should not be done. These are the national icons. They are international icons, rather, I would say. So let's not view them from the lens of 21st century. History is about time and space. You cannot look at it from the way you want to perceive and highlight it the way you want to perceive it today. They have a lot of sacredness towards the very essence is basically the time and space. You cannot take away that from them. So of course he needs to be given credit to. Yet we need to really highlight what these revolutionaries were basically, or they stood for. Another question which you tried to emphasize basically was the youth today, when they look at it, the entire notion of violence, the entire notion of resistance as such. I'll read the small para of Bhagat Singh. It's in Hindi, where this was written just a week prior when he was hanged. क्रांति करना बहुत कठिन काम है, ये किसी एक आदमी की ताकत के वश की बात नहीं है, और ना ही यह किसी निश्चित तारीख को आ सकती है। यह तो एक विशेष सामाजिक आर्थिक परिस्थितियों से पैदा होती है, और एक संगठित पार्टी को ऐसे अवसर को संभालना होता है, और जनता को इसके लिए तैयार रहना होता है। क्रांति के दुस्साहस कार्य के लिए सभी शक्तियों को संगठित करना होता है। इस सब के लिए क्रांतिकारी कार्यकर्ताओं को अनेक कुर्बानियां देनी होती है। Now, if you see this, he wants a society which should in fact promote socio-economic equity. Bhagat Singh and the contemporaries, see, each revolutionary, I would not say what they did was right and they are justified, correct? But whatever they engaged in, their method was different, but that it was not against the nation for that matter. Their methods it was more in the form of reaction than offensive for that matter, right? They would react to certain things because there would be no reaction which would come from the other end. Like I remember a very good statement by Lokmanya Tilak where he said, International Congress, the moderate era is nothing else but following political mendicancy. It is following nothing else but trying to orient and indoctrinate the generation into following a petition-oriented resistance, which is not possible. We are not here to beg from the government our freedom. We should be assertive in asking for it, and it cannot be bargained. It has to be achieved because it is inherent. Freedom is a very inherent process as such, if you go to see. So Bhagat Singh, when he got himself aware, when he would read Tolstoy or for that matter, Aristotle, Rousseau, Marx, he had understood what was happening globally. He was quite well aware of the causes and the consequences. So when he read about Lafayette from France, or when he read about Garibaldi, he was quite well aware of the entire course. He was equally aware of the perhaps retaliation as such, or what he would perhaps face as a consequence. He chose to remain there. He got arrested. He did not escape from there. That speaks volumes, and we always overlook this as entire aspect, that when he had the opportunity to run away, it takes more courage to stand there and surrender, you know. So he was quite clear about what they were involved in, for that matter. So when we look at giving a message to the young today, in fact, first and foremost, be clear with what exactly you want to get into. There has to be more than adequate reading about what you want to get into. A path, an act, it in fact requires a lot of base preparation. It cannot be impulsive. We look at these acts very impulsive, but let me tell you, the grenade which was used in the bomb which was thrown in the assembly, okay, did not had the sharpeners. They were only there they were prepared in such a way that it would just create a smoke and a spark. We do not have any reported injuries when they threw this hand grenade, for that matter. So it was a very well thought act. It was not a very random act. They did not go there to bomb. They went there with the bomb, but also with the pamphlets, which they distributed around, for that matter. So if you go to see, there was a very systematic prior preparation which they had done, for that matter. They did not wanted to escape. They wanted to make the British Raj hear what exactly they have to say, because they were not in the mood of listening. Lala Lajpat Rai's death, in fact, also for that matter, should have had a nationwide condemnation, but it did not really happen that way. And that is when you have the wife of Chitranjan Das. She took up to the public appeal. She said, you cannot have a, a man who was Arya Samajist at one point of a time. He was a very well-known extremist Congress leader, the one who was there in Congress party from its genesis. And suddenly his death does not mean anything to you. So that appeal, in fact, was responded by Bhagat Singh and the comrades. So the generation at that point of a time also, the generation like Bhagat Singh also, we cannot just categorize or classify them as the ones who resorted to violence. No, they did not. It was an intellectual debate which they wanted to get into, and this was nothing else but getting attention from the people and the media, more important. Media did highlight them, did print their statements, what they had to say.
In case audience have any questions, I have been waiting for them, but in any case, if anyone will like to unmute at the moment and will like to ask before I invite Dr. Prakash Masaram for the presidential remarks. Okay. May I now invite Dr. Masaram? Masaram, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir. So, sir, now the floor is yours for your presidential remarks.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Yes.
And first of all, very congratulations, hearty congratulations to Dr. Avkash Jadhav, sir, for giving a very insightful and thought-provoking lectures on today's topic. And also, I am very much thankful to Professor Dr. Shukla ma'am for giving me invitation as a chairperson of the today's session, and also hearty congratulations for successful this event. Yeah, basically regarding the Bhagat Singh, Bhagat Singh, Bhagat Singh, the personality of the Bhagat Singh, very famous in the historical context, and Dr. Jadhav sir already, focus the achievement and the various historical fact through the primary sources, and that is very remarkable job sir has done, because in our history, as we said, no document, no history. So that is why in that context, So the lecture is very much, valuable in terms of the historical research, as we are the student of the history. Sir already talk about the right from the childhood situation to his contribution towards the revolutionary movement and also India independence movement. As ma'am said, along with the Bhagat Singh, so many revolutionaries and the personality contributed a lot. But in mainstream history, most of the hero completely unsung, untold till today. And we are the researcher and student of the history. We are trying to discover and find out that objectivity of the history, who definitely contributed a lot for getting the independence from our colonial power. As sir said, all the Bhagat Singh's family, right from the grandfather, father, and his uncles, all sacrifices their family in the independence movement. And however, the family, where all the family members were very much well settled, well off, but however they sacrifices only for their motherhood, mean to say nation, we can say अपने भारत भूमि के लिए, अपने भारत माता को बचाने के लिए उन्होंने अपना सैक्रिफाइस किया, वेल सेटल थे, फिर भी उन्होंने नेशन के लिए अपना बलिदान दिया. दैट इज आल्सो द रिमार्केबल थिंग. वन ऑफ द the writer who already mentioned the Sardar Bhagat Singh, that is in an epic in Hindi by Sri Krishna Saral, who composed the epic, that is Sardar Bhagat Singh, and it was given the subtitle as a progressive epic of national consciousness by the author. Mean to say, through the achievement of the Bhagat Singh provided the platform for the youth people to contribute it from their side for getting the independence. Again, Dr. Jadhav sir already highlighted the Gandhian philosophy and the Bhagat Singh's revolutionaries philosophy. Yeah, of course, as sir stated, the method was different, but the reaction and the ultimate aim of the both personalities, mean to say, in the present context, these are the same, because both are wanted to get the independence from the colonial power. Mean to say, Gandhian methods, as sir said, belong to the non-violence, ट्रूथ, अहिंसा, सत्य, उसका आग्रह धरना, और उसी आधार पर जो कुछ हमारा एम्स ऑब्जेक्टिव है वो ब्रिटिशों के माध्यम से हस्तगत करना. बट एट द सेम टाइम revolutionaries movement also very important. Mean to say, in one of the slide, Dr. Jadhav sir already mentioned that independence could never be owned by the folding hands. That is very important, quote. And no freedom is worthwhile unless millions make supreme sacrifices. Yeah. So in that context, sir, that is true, because most of the freedom fighters, through the revolutionaries movement or Gandhian philosophical related movements, mean to say, all the philosophers, all the personalities, contributed a lot, and ultimately we got the result. So in that context, the whether it is revolutionary movement or Gandhian movement, both are very much important and equal for getting the independence. Even when we talk about the untold and unsung heroes, those are contributed a lot. For example, if you take a tribal revolt, in which from the various kind of the community, like Bhil community, Gond community, Santhal community, then Kolam community, Warli community, so many heroes who contributed a lot, like Narayan Singh Uike, Veer Baburao Shedmake, Shamadada Kolam, who known as a Robin Hood, and Tanta Bhilla, then Jabra Pahadia, then Raju Allaru from South India. Mean to say, all the heroes, they contributed, because recently in Raj Bhavan, some correspondence done between Department of History and the Raj Bhavan, the Principal Secretary of Raj Bhavan, and they said that, sir, we wanted such a hero. Those contributed a lot in the independence movement, and of course, with the support of that, we got that result. But still, they are completely unsung, untold. So that kind of the personality and their achievement we want, their information we want. So some collaboration done with the Department of History and University and the Raj Bhavan. So under that, MAU, I have tried to find out some heroes at the local level. Those are really contributed. For example, in Quit India movement, 1942. If you take an example of the Vidarbha part, that is known as the northeastern Maharashtra. So in which, Panchi Dhurve, Manohar Dhurve, Maganlal Gond, Motiram Gond, so many kind of the tribal hero who belong to the Gond community, without any intention, but however they were very much, we can say, living in a poverty level. We can say had not having the much more food and all. They struggling a lot, and even overnight they become an encroacher because of the colonial policy, because of the, we can say, the harassment and the exploitative policy of the thekedar and contractor and money lenders and saukars. But however, if you take an example of the Quit India movement and the Jhenda Satyagraha taken place in the particularly Asti and Chimur in Vidarbha, so very heroically, and they contributed a lot, and getting the leadership of the masses for stop the atrocity and the harassment policy of the colonial period. So that also, aspect we should understand when we talk about the revolutionaries movement, or when we talk about the personalities who contributed a lot for getting the independence. But no doubt, Bhagat Singh's achievement regarding the independence movement, we never forget about that, because I think उनका ऐसा कहना था कि, as Dr. Jadhav sir said, कि only we can say, there was a labor bill pass against the labor bill pass by the assembly. So that obviously that bills opposed by the Bhagat Singh, and in the reaction of that, they उन्होंने bomb का use किया, but only for the, we can say, deep fear, not just hurting to the someone person, because of some affected due to the, we can say, the bomb blast. But But that kind of the, we can say, phenomena already happened in, we can say, in the French Parliament in 1893, in which some revolutionaries, used such a kind of the bombs, bomb blast in the British Parliament for getting some fundamental rights from the British Parliament, French Parliament. So obviously that kind of the mass awakening a lot in the French Parliament or French citizen. So on the basis of that kind of the activity, done by the Bhatikeshwar Datta and the Bhagat Singh for the, favoring of the labor bill and giving a welfares, and we can say some whatever, remedies for the worker. As Dr. Jadhav sir said, Bhagat Singh not only, activated or participated in the independence movement, but also various kind of the, welfare policy regarding the marginalized people, labor community, for their empowerment, for their, we can say, development and welfare, who contributed a lot. And that is why one of the students from Department of History who did his MPhil dissertation on the Bhagat Singh, but Bhagat Singh personality depicted through the Bollywood film. So mean to say, not only the Bollywood, but also many more languages, Hindi, Punjabi, English, many more languages, and the various kind of the types of the literature in which the Bhagat Singh personality, portray and highlighted their work. And obviously that title is very much attracted to me. What is that? Progressive effects of national consciousness. So this title itself, indicate that Bhagat Singh, created the progressive national consciousness among the youth and among all the citizens in that time. So I think definitely sir's lecture, will be very fruitful and beneficial to all the researcher, to all the faculty member. And also I am very much, sir, enlightened from your lecture, definitely. And once again, congratulations, sir, and congratulations, Professor Dr. Shukla ma'am, for organizing such a important event. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. And thank you so much, Dr. Avkash Jadhav. So with your permission, can we do one provide one photo opportunity to all the participants? So I request the IT team, if you can allow the participants to quickly open their cameras and take the print screen, that is a screenshot.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Nita ma'am also there. Dr. Nita Khandpekar ma'am.
Nita madam, so nice to see you. You were also attending. It's so nice to know that. IT team, please take the print screen screenshot. Once you are done, please let us know.
Done, ma'am.
Thank you so much. So with the permission of Dr. Masaram and also Dr. Jadhav, we can formally close. But before that, it's very, very important on my part to thank all those who attended the session today, especially accepting the invitation which was extended by WRC ICSSR. So first of all, let me thank Dr. Avkash Jadhav for very promptly saying yes to invitation of WRC ICSSR, and accepting and saying yes, I will be coming, I will be going ahead and will be no, definitely delivering this lecture. So thank you so much, Dr. Jadhav, for consenting to this session, because it has added so much of value to how we need to look at some of our national leaders of the time when Indian Revolution was at its peak, and various individuals, revolutionaries, political thinkers contributed in their own way to the process of ensuring that India got independence. And the kind of discussion which you have placed forward, which I hope that the young participants of the day, and there are several young participants for this session, that they remember that Bhagat Singh believed in total sacrifice. There was no thread of selfishness associated with that, what gain he will be making. And at the same time, he valued and had high regard for human life. The insight which you offered about his thought about how he looked at the revolution, and the revolution for him was an instrument of protest and not that of violence. So I hope that young attendees today will remember this, and will remember that you are not it is not appropriate and not giving due credit to Bhagat Singh in case you are admiring him because he raised gun. His idea of raising gun, and in this specific case, his act of revolution was throwing bomb at the session parliament, which is heart, political nerve center of the country. The idea was protest and not violence. So you remember you remember him in the right context. That will be the right tribute to him. I also thank head Department of History, Dr. Masaram, again consenting very quickly to my invitation to preside the session. I will be failing in my duty to thank the young IT team members who have contributed in managing this session. They are Sojwal Bhosle and Aniket Patil. I thank my colleague, Dr. Naina, from Alkesh Dinesh Modi, as well as also she is the MMS coordinator, for again providing me the technical help and support which sometimes we need for these kind of sessions. I thank all the participants who are present here today, including the faculty members. I could see Dr. Neeta Khanpekar only once. No, she initiated and opened her camera. Thank you, madam, so much for attending this session. And there might be other participants also who are faculty members. Thank you. I thank finally my staff at Western Regional Center ICSSR and the University of Mumbai DICT team, who always has been extending support for providing the IT infrastructure for conducting these sessions. Thank you so much, and we will continue to organize several sessions, and we will be ensuring that you all receive these invitations. Thank you so much for being here today. So with the permission of Dr. Masaram and Dr. Jadhav, I will end the session now. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank
Yeah.
you
Yes,
very much.
please, please.
So Aniket, we can close the session. You are the host at the moment, so you can close the session now. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.